We all have experienced racism and discrimination in one form or the other, but what is going on in South Africa is nothing to write home about. For those that know me and my firm stand against discrimination, bigotry, and all forms of hate, you might be expecting something based on race alone. But today, let's not go too far and let's talk and elaborate on this bigotry act that is already tearing us apart as a race here in Africa. And we are not going to even start in South Africa, but we are going to get there. Today, we are going to start in Sudan, a country with an ongoing reoccurring conflict. The United Nations report indicates that tens of thousands of people have lost their lives since the war erupted in April of 2023. And with over 24,000 civilians killed and nearly 13 million displaced, which could be regarded as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. When I think about Sudan today, my heart breaks. It is a situation that I cannot escape, but it is not just politics. This is about what happens when hate and discrimination are allowed to grow until they swallow a whole nation. It began, as many tragedies do, with rivalry. Two powerful men who were once allies later turned against each other. On one side, the Sudanese armed forces, and on the other, we have the rapid support forces. At first, it was just like a normal struggle for control, but beneath it ran deeper. I mean, when you say deeper wounds of division, of ethnicity, race, and privilege that had been festering for generations. Now, in Sudan, discrimination was never a hidden thing. People were judged based on their color of their skin, on the tribe they belonged to, and by the region they came from. In an interview I watched, people narrated stories of how they were treated as lesser humans, as outsiders in their own country. And when the rapid support forces rose from the ashes of the militia groups that were accused of genocides in Darfur, it carried with it the legacy of violence and hatred towards their brothers from the Black African communities. Now, what might have just happened to be a fight for power became something far darker, in which neighbors turned against neighbors, identity were weaponized, and lives were torn apart. We saw videos of markets burned down, homes were looted, and women violated, and all this happened not just because of war, but because of who they are. As I'm telling you this, I've come to realize and know the war in Sudan is not just about some military generals fighting for capital city of Khartoum, It is all that happens when hate is written into the fabric of the society, when discrimination is tolerated for so long that it becomes a tool of destruction. Today, ordinary people, women and children are the ones paying the price as they got caught in the conflict, born out of the refusal to see one another as equal. That to me is the tragedy of Sudan, a war that began with power but is sustained by prejudice. Now, between you and me, imagine a land so rich that its soil could power the entire world's smartphones, electric cars, and satellites. Now, imagine the people of that land living in some of the harshest forms of poverty in the world, with children working long hours in dangerous mines, families displaced, and entire villages and communities erased, while foreign corporations and warlords profit. It might sound like a dystopian film, and this is the reality of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a tale of hate-fueled exploitation, a centuries-long discrimination against a nation and its people simply because of what lies beneath their feet. To properly understand how this African nation dilapidated to what we see today, we need to go back and quickly reconstruct the history of the sovereign status when in the late 1800s, King Leopold II of Belgium literally made Congo his personal property, and millions of Congolese were forced into slave labor to extract rubber and ivory. It was regarded one of the most brutal colonial regimes in history that pitched an early form of systemic hate and dehumanization of those who dare challenged it and resisted. Those people were mutilated, had their villages burned, bombed and families torn apart. Leopold saw the Congolese not as people, but as tools. Their suffering at that time was invisible to Europe until global outrage forced him to finally hand over to the state of Belgium. But at that time, the damage was done, as the cycle of exploitation had just begun. And fast forward to 1960, when Congo finally gained independence, a young charismatic leader named Patrice Lumumba emerged, dreamt of a united, independent Congo that will use its own resources for its own people. But what we saw is the so-called Western powers feared a strong, resource-rich African nation outside of their control, and because of this reason, Lumumba was overthrown and assassinated in a coup backed by foreign interests. Lumumba's death was not just the murder of a man, but the assassination of Congo's future, and a clear message was sent, and it was made clear that the Congo's minerals were too valuable to be left in the hands of its own people. Then came Mobutu Sese Seko, who was backed by Western powers, and he ruled with an iron fist, as billions of dollars worth of Congo's wealth were stolen, leaving his own people impoverished. During his time, discrimination wasn't just racial, it was class-based, with a corrupt elite thriving while ordinary Congolese starved. Mobutu rule showed hate can take many forms, and sometimes it is the hatred of one's own people. Then in the late 1990s, after Mobutu's fall, Congo descended into war, and neighboring countries like Rwanda and Uganda invaded. Although claiming security concerns, their troops looted Congo's coltan, gold, and diamonds. This is at the same time when different rebel groups were armed, funded, and turned into proxies for resource extraction. With over 5 million deaths on record, it is the deadliest conflict since World War II. And to look critically at it, the war is not just about power alone, but rooted in who got control over Congo's treasure. Hate between ethnic groups were implanted and used as a weapon to divide and rule, while multinational corporations quietly bought up the spoils extracted. Every time you charge your phone or order a new gadget, remember a piece of Congo is in your hands. And with it, the story of a people still fighting for justice. The tragedy of the Congo is not just about minerals. It is about a world that has decided that some lives are worth less than the devices those lives help power. There are a lot of journalists and activists fighting for transparency in the supply chain, which will really help resolve the conflict. And the story of Congo is not finished. It must be rewritten, and the world must confront its own complexities. We cannot continue to keep looking away, and it is high time we chose justice over convenience. My narration in this video today, however, will not be complete if I fail to mention the genesis statement I made. So let's return back. Discrimination and hate are no more or less two potent poisons that have followed humanity for centuries. In South Africa, these poisons have found a new mask referred to as xenophobia, a form of hate so deep that even in places of healing like hospitals, Africans consider foreigners are turned away, left to suffer. This is not just about borders, but about the long-standing crisis of hate against Black people by Black people themselves. We all know the stories of xenophobia in South Africa is not a recent one, but one that is rooted in its history and bitter legacy of apartheid, where division was law and hate was a policy. For decades, South Africa was taught to see difference, not unity. The system of apartheid trained the mind to categorize people by color, tribe, and by origin, to the extent that even after the chains of apartheid were broken, those seeds of division didn't simply vanish. They just took new forms. As South Africa opened up, it became a land of hope for many across the continent of Africa. From Zimbabwe to Malawi, from Mozambique to Nigeria, people came searching for work, education, and safety. But instead of being welcomed as brothers and sisters, many were branded as invaders and accused of stealing jobs, taking houses, or even boarding hospitals. And with this, the crisis of xenophobia grew and the violence erupted in waves. I still remember watching the news of riots in 2008, 15, and 2019. when mobs stormed the streets, burning shops, killing people simply because they were considered foreign. And today, that spirit of hate creeps into spaces where it should never belong, into the hospital. Believe me or not, there are some videos that I cannot even show them. Imagine a mother heavily pregnant arriving at a South African hospital. Instead of comfort, she's met with suspicion, having the nurses whispering, "Where are you from?" Doctors refuse to treat her until she proves her nationality. People posing as security guards chase patients out of waiting rooms. The color of their skin here is not the issue. After all, they are all blacks like everyone else. It is the passport they carry, their accent, and place of birth. And so, people are left to die, not because they lack humanity, but because they are labeled foreign. This is the tragedy of South Africa today, a country once seen as the heart of liberation, now known as a land where black Africans turn against each other. But we must ask ourselves one very important question. Why is this hate so easy to ignite? And if we are to search critically for the answer, it lies deeper in poverty, unemployment, and inequality, which has been the things fueling this frustration. Leaders, instead of addressing these root problems, point fingers at immigrants, and the people, desperate and angry, believe the lie that their suffering is caused by foreigners, and with that, hatred becomes a policy and discrimination becomes normalized. At its core, this is not just about Sudan, Congo, or South Africa alone. As focused on today's episode, it is an African crisis and could be better explained as a story of how colonization trained us to despise ourselves and how decades later we still continue that cycle. A hate so ingrained that even amongst our own people we draw invisible borders. And here is the bitter truth. As long as we hate ourselves, as long as Africans and black people all across the world look at each other with suspicion, division, and violence, the world will never respect us. How can we demand dignity from others when we are denying it to our own? And at the core of it, the xenophobia in South Africa today is not just about foreigners. It is a reflection that shows us all what has happened when discrimination, hate, forms the foundation of a nation's soul, and its leaders fail to address it or denounce it head-on. Until we break free from this poison, until we learn to love and protect one another as Africans, the cycle will continue and respect will remain out of reach. Again, I would like to reiterate that this is not just a Sudan, Congo, or South Africa story, but one that is about Africa as a whole. And until we heal this wound, history will keep repeating itself, one act of hate at a time. Thank you.